The Narcissist by Sean Fury. Author's note. Before we begin, I'd like to make one thing clear. This is a story about losers. Not destitute losers, nor people who had the world offered to them on a silver platter and shoved it away, turning to heroin and coke instead. These aren't losers who grew up in a poor environment that have never had the opportunity to succeed. This is a story about 4 run-of-the-mill losers, the ones you've met, the ones that aren't interesting enough to write a book about, or to raise $10 million to film a movie around. This isn't the biography of Robert Downey Jr. or Samuel L. Jackson, people who had low points in their lives and struggled to rise out of it. They are not in a hole that is impossible to climb out of. This is a story about 4 nobodies who do not even know what struggle, pain, strife, or hardship is. They've seen movies about such things. They know that these things exist, but they have yet to experience them. Nothing happens to these individuals that would give cause to make a reader sob. Yet before you lies hundreds and hundreds of pages. Pages filled with their story, my story. Maybe I have wasted my time and yours in the attempt of telling this story, but maybe I haven't. For reasons that you will discover later, hopefully, I find this story fascinating. And I hope you do too. So please enjoy a story about nothing as seen through the perspective of a group of nobodies. Sean. Sean sat across from Caleb at the restaurant and studied him. I have a lot of issues with you. Like what? Caleb asked with an indifferent tone. Lots of things. Like your name. Caleb. That's a weird name. I knew a kid in high school with that name, and he was a dweeb. Skinny, short, and had good grades, and he was black. Caleb is a black name. Caleb laughed and replied, I am black. Sean studied him harder. Are you? My father is. He also has traces of Japanese and German in him. Caleb grabbed his glass of water firmly with his right hand and took a short sip. Traces? Sean shook his head. Something is wrong here. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something doesn't seem right. You have a wooden ring on your right hand. Caleb looked at his ring, then looked at Sean. I'm aware. Sean scratched his head and Caleb laughed. Do you want me to help you out? Caleb asked. I don't need you to. I know what's going on here. You're a show-off. Caleb laughed louder, genuinely. Sean didn't realize he didn't hear genuine laughter often until he heard this man's laugh. I'm a show-off. Never been called that before. Like you give a fuck about what people have called you before. They've probably used such adjectives as intelligent, interesting, and perhaps pretentious if the person was smart enough to catch it. I'm not calling you pretentious because that's far too general for the likes of you. Spike Lee is pretentious. You're not Spike Lee. You're a show-off. Caleb looked at Sean with amusement in his eyes. You like hearing yourself talk? He said it as a fact, Sean noticed. Yes, I do, Sean explained a little too loudly. But today is not the day that we talk about me. We will have more days like this in the future, and you will have plenty of time to understand the person that is Sean Fury. And I'm sure you will better than most everyone else I know. But today we are talking about you. How do you feel about that topic? Caleb spread out his hands and shrugged. I don't have a problem with it. Good! Sean rested his chin on his palm and began drumming his fingers against his face. He was excited. What defines you? What defines me? Another shorter burst of genuine laughter. Most of the things I do and believe in would have to be derived from my less than fortunate childhood, I suppose. It's pretty much the textbook representation of what it is to be growing up in the worst circumstances in America. You had a bad childhood. Caleb took another sip of water. Very bad. My father was in jail until I was 16. I lived with my mother and we moved from a total of 6 states, all the while she was nursing her drug addiction in any way she could. You know the stereotype of the crack addict stealing their own TV and selling it? My mom did that. Give me your worst story. Caleb took a breath. Okay. One day my mother sat me down and apologized for the way things were. She promised me things were going to change after that she would pick me up from school from now on and I wouldn't have to walk 2 miles to get home. So the next Monday, school lets out and I wait for my mother for about 20 minutes before I begin to walk home by myself. I get home and open the door to our small apartment and I enter the site of what looked like a murder scene. Blood on the walls, chairs and tables turned over, broken glass at my feet, and my mother just laid there in the middle of it, bleeding on the living room rug, unconscious. Her face purple with welts that looked like they came from the metal of the end of a belt. Those were all over her body, and she had this maroon silk robe on, a really short one that only covered slightly above the navel, with the rest of her body bare. I thought she was dead when I first walked in. She wasn't moving and I couldn't see her breathing. So I called 911 and they came and brought her back to life. Sean sat there, staring at Caleb, trying to take it all in. What had happened? He finally managed to get out. Her and the guy she was seeing made a huge score, and they left the stash at her place while he went out to see if they could sell it for more. And by the time he had gotten back, she had used half of the drugs herself, so he flew into a rage and beat her half to death while she wasn't even conscious. Then he took the rest of the drugs and never came back. Caleb finished. Wow. That doesn't even sound real. I didn't expect that. Caleb snorted. Who would? Look at me. I'm clean-cut, nicely dressed, and speak with a vocabulary college students don't have. This generation, at least. Sean laughed. Exactly. I feel shitty now. I didn't know I would get a story like that. I don't know the proper etiquette to respond to a story like that, especially towards a person who seems so dispassionate about the whole thing as you. You could have been talking about what you had for breakfast, which is a cliche metaphor, I agree, but it suits the situation perfectly. Are you a sociopath? Caleb chuckled to himself. No. I'm a well-rounded human being with a full range of emotions and feelings. It just so happens the conversation that you're choosing to have with me is far too direct to speak of anything passionately, as you put it. What do you mean the conversation I'm choosing to have with you is too direct? What am I doing? You're skipping the pretense, the friendly chit-chat that comes with most first-time conversations between people. The who, what, when, where, and why. You didn't ask where I'm from. You didn't ask if I'm going to school and what subject I'm studying. You didn't ask where I live and who I live with. Instead, you asked what defines me as a person, which is not to say what morals stand as a backbone for the entirety of my life. I could tell you what I believe in and what standards I will never compromise for the gain of something more tangible. You asked me what is the one thing that dictates every action and thought that I partake in throughout my day-to-day, and that would be my childhood. I live with my girlfriend and my best friend, both of which I've known for 8 years. I live here in Mount Holly, which is an anonymous town in New Jersey with no renown or recognition. I have an associate's degree in education and work as a substitute teacher. Why do I do these things? Why don't I want more? Sean was sure the question was rhetorical, but he could not help but blurt out, You want normalcy, because you never had it. Exactly. I'm sure years from now, after I've soaked in enough consistency, ambition will creep its way into my thoughts. The need to be recognized will come along with it. That is why I'm furthering my education to the limits that the USA has put forth for me, just so that by the time I want more out of life, I'll have the means to do it, with a PhD. In education. Historical research. Sean burst out laughing. Oh my God. I didn't think I'd ever meet a person like you. Not here. I never thought I'd like them. Wow. You're going to be my new favorite person, man. Caleb laughed again. Thank you. How old were you? 12. Sean clapped his hands with glee. He looked like a child opening presents. Fuck! Good job, that was a test. I know it was. Let me just say, I could imagine most people getting annoyed with the concept of you testing their intelligence every time you hang out with them. Sean hunched his shoulders and became sincere. Does it bother you? No. He became relaxed again. Good. I don't go around testing everyone's intelligence. Too many setups for failure. Nope, just people as smart as you. Caleb smiled. And how many of those do you find? I knew you were going to ask that. You're prideful. You think highly of yourself. Sean sat back in his chair and began plucking at the loose hairs on his neck. What got your father in prison? He got in a fight with his girlfriend and grabbed her neck too hard. He ended up snapping it entirely. Caleb finished curtly, with the same dispassionate eyes he had with his last retelling. Sean closed his eyes and shook his head. Fuck you. Where's your water? What? You didn't sip your water. Caleb looked confused. The last 2 times he played the sociopath, he took a sip of water. It completes the look somehow. Humor returned to Caleb's eyes, and it was his turn to shake his head. You're ridiculous, man. Do you think you're going to get annoyed with me? Sean asked. I'll let you know if I do. Sean grabbed the check from the table that had been laying there for the past 30 minutes. Let's get out of here. Next time we talk about me. And I'm sure every conversation after, Caleb replied, amused. Sean stopped for a second and wondered if Caleb knew how accurate that statement was. He stood up and took his wallet out. One last question, he said. Caleb looked up at him slowly as he began to rise. What? What's your IQ again? 130, he said definitively. And what's average? 100. Sean sighed. Our text combos are going to have a lot of LOLs. I'm going to hate that. Sean was happy. Things were going good in his life. He was getting rid of a clingy girlfriend and trading in for a new one, and as he drove home he thought about his new acquaintance, Caleb, and chuckled to himself. Moments like these to come too far and few between, he said to himself, shrugging. He pulled up to his house and parked on the side of the road. Someone was in his spot, as was usually the case. He got out of the car and looked up at his house, or to be more correct, his side of the house, or to be even more correct, his 2 floors of his side of the house. The house was rented out as a duplex turned into a quad something. Sean shared the 2 floors on the right side of the house with his brother. He loved the place, though it was dirty, and neither he nor Dick did anything to improve upon its cleanliness. Sean didn't care. He had few friends and even fewer company, and he could give a damn about what other people thought entering his house. He thought of Legs and scrunched his face. She wanted to see him today. Sean leaned against the passenger side of his car and relaxed. The weather was perfect. 70 degrees. The sun directly overhead, and he could feel a cool breeze run through his outspread fingertips. The trees were singing as the wind rustled their leaves. Moments like these. He shook his head. Weather like this is never appreciated well enough. It can't be, he thought to himself. I could stay out here all day, he said aloud. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't have to look, but he did anyway. Legs. What time can I come and suck your dick one last time? Oops, I mean pick up my ring, LOL. Sean winced and crossed his legs. That kind of stuff shouldn't be allowed. It's like tempting a heroin addict with heroin. He sighed and looked at his phone. He had to text back, though the state he was now in would not net the proper response. The temptation had already snuck its way in through his entire body. Already images of what he had done to her in the past were popping into his head, exploding like burst bubbles. That girl. A girl. So anxious to please him, willing to do whatever he asked. All that was required was to command it. He shook his head harder. Porn first, then text back. He unattached himself from the side of his car and gave himself a nervous shudder. I can do this. Porn. I can do this. Porn is the key to my salvation. He beat his hand against his head as he walked up the stairs to his house. He was going to fail, and he knew it. The feeling was in his gut. It wasn't lust. Lust was a simpler urge that is much easier to identify. It was regret. It took Sean a second to actually understand that it was that. Regret was what he was feeling. He was already heading into his house, his feet shuffling across the carpeted staircase. One more time and we'll savor it forever, he said to himself definitively. He could hear his brother's voice sounding from his small room. Sean smirked. He really did get the better of this deal. He got the whole 3rd floor to himself. Dick never had a reason to come up there. While Dick's room sat in the middle of the hallway on the 2nd floor, all the traffic of the house had to walk past his door. He never had any privacy. Apart from the long trek downstairs to take a piss every morning into the only toilet available to them, Sean went out on this deal. Some things are done right in this world. I'm hungry, Dick whined from his room. Sean approached the door. His brother was on the phone. Richie, you know me. I don't put effort into anything when I'm hungry, even deciding where to eat. I don't care, Dick whined some more. Sean walked into the room and sat at the foot of the bed. Dick laid sprawled in the center on his stomach, his feet dangling off the edge of the bed. Sean nudged him. Is that Richie boy? Let me talk to him. I'm not giving up the phone until he tells me he's on his way over for food, Dick said into the phone. Sean leaned over and snatched the phone out of Dick's hand. Richie boy, I miss you, man. Why are you hanging out with this degenerate? There's so many other things you can do with a Sunday afternoon. Richard laughed on the other line. Yeah? What are you doing? Why don't you come with us? Sean smirked again. I can't really do that on account I have females to destroy. My schedule's booked with that today. Females plural? Who and who? Rich asked. Well, I got Legs coming over to pick up the ring she threw at my face a couple of nights ago, but I'm debating as to whether or not to fuck her one last time. You know, just for good measure. Then I got my second date with the Persian from work. I feel like the old me, he sighed, satisfaction emanating from his voice. Dick groaned loudly. Holy fuck, this is ridiculous. Ask him what time he's coming over. What time are you coming over, Richie? The Dick wants to know. Rich paused. Could he give me an hour? I have to shower and whatnot. Sean laughed. All right, female. He turned to Dick. Give him an hour, he says. Dick put his face into his pillow and began muttering, son of a bitch, son of a bitch, son of a fucking bitch. Do you hear that? Sean put the phone close to Dick. You can still cancel, man. Rich laughed. Tell him to calm the fuck down. I'll be over in a bit. Sean looked at the degenerate that was his brother. He was wearing nothing but an old, unwashed robe and boxer briefs. It was 2 p.m. His room smelled. I'll tell him, only because I love you. Rich did his signature nervous laugh that Sean adored. Love you too, buddy. Sean smiled and hung up. Richard. Richard put the phone in his pocket and looked quickly at the barber. He was minding his business, already moving on to the next customer. "Thanks again," Richard said, heading for the door. The barber gave a curt wave. "Tell your dad I said hi, all right?" The barber replied. Richard smiled and gave some nod of assurance as he exited the barber shop. He felt slightly depressed. He hated doing that, the formalities of polite day-to-day interaction. He envied people who could walk around and say nothing, no thank yous or excuse me, just not knowing proper courtesy in general. That would be fine for him. Instead, his family had to raise him in this slightly upper-middle-class society where nobody is mean and everybody walks with a smile on their face. It sickened him. Yet he shrugged it off, for there was nothing he could do about it. One day he would get away from here. He knew it. He headed to his car, stopping for only a second to realize just how nice the day was, and began driving home. Richard pulled up to his house. He expected to see his parents. They keep to their schedule, and at this time, every Sunday since the beginning of summer, they've been outside working on their garden. He didn't care one way or the other, was just curious. He headed inside. Quickly he was greeted by the missing parents. They were shuffling around the foyer, putting on shoes, fastening watches, and grabbing light jackets. "Hey, Rich," his dad spoke first. "Hey, where are you guys going?" Richard asked. "We thought we might see the Avengers and get it over with." "What do you think?" his mother asked. "She was in a good mood today." "That was always good." "Yeah, I mean, it's a good movie. I liked it. I didn't have a problem with it," Richard replied indifferently. "Sharon and Michael saw it yesterday. They thought it was phenomenal," his mother said enthusiastically. "How's the weather outside?" "Good?" his father asked, tying his shoelaces. "It's good. It's really good, actually. You don't need a jacket." "You hear that?" "Windows down, Nico," his mother said sternly. "So what do you got going on today?" his dad asked. "Not much. I'm supposed to hang out with Sean's brother, Rich, and then it's kind of open-ended." "Oh. Have you eaten yet?" "We just got some fresh cold cuts. They're in the fridge," his mother said. And where is Sean? I miss him. Have him come over for lunch one of these days." "He's taking his time out with dates this summer, and I'll eat before I leave," Richard lied. Lying to his parents was second nature for Richard. "Oh, boy. Tell him to slow down. They aren't going anywhere. Invite him over," his mother said, laughing. "You all set?" his father asked, looking at his wife. "Yep." "Okay, we'll see you back when we get back," his father said. "Sure. I'll see you later." His father opened the door. His mother hugged him and gave him a kiss on the His father opened the door. His mother hugged him and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "Be good. Love you," she said as she walked out after her husband. "Love you too," Richard said, it more to himself than her. She was already gone. The door was shut, and he was alone in his 3-story house. He started up the stairs directly in front of him, his baby picture staring down at him as he passed. Then the landing. Next came the dead people, his grandparents, his grandfather in a military uniform, smiling and handsome, brimming with confidence. Richard's age. Relatives told him that the two could have been twins, Richard and his grandfather. Richard didn't agree. "My nose is bigger," he thought to himself as he continued on towards his bathroom. He turned the shower on and sat down on the toilet waiting for it to warm up. The bathroom was clean, immaculate. Every room in this house was. Richard knew he appreciated it. He knew he liked how the house smelled when he entered. He liked the variety of juices and beverages his parents kept stocked in the 2 refrigerators they possessed. He followed suit. His room was always clean. His clothes were always washed and unwrinkled. He got a haircut every 2 weeks. His nails were never long. He knew these things about himself, yet for some reason none of it mattered to him. He could live without the neat order of this house. He wanted to. He wanted to walk around in a disheveled mess from time to time. He sighed. He didn't even know how to make such a thing happen. He wanted to leave, but first things first, he had to shower. Richard adjusted the bridge of his glasses as he cut the engine of his Mazda. He took a quick glance at the rearview mirror and sighed. Sean was going to say something. He shrugged and got out of the car. The outside steps to Sean's house seemed like a mile away. There was never any available parking on the street. He did a short sprint to close the distance. He trotted up the stairs and took a couple of breaths to compose himself. He was out of shape. He called the other Richard's phone and reported that he was outside. In seconds he heard him coming down the stairs to answer the door. "Richie boy!" Dick explained as he opened the door. Richard tightened up and waited for the assault. Dick grabbed him and hugged him close, his pale blue robe billowing, his unshaved face scraped against Richard's own. He could smell him. "You're not even dressed," Richard said to Dick. Dick rubbed his nose intensely. "Well, fucking Sean is being an asshole." "What the hell did Sean do?" Sean's voice trailed from the apartment/house. Richard could see his feet at the top of the stairs. "I'm being an asshole? I'm being the asshole, apparently. He's not going to side with you, dick boy. Come here, Richie. Richie entered the house. What's up, man? Glasses? You wear glasses at a time like this? Too many things to comprehend. Let me look at them. Come here, Sean was yelling. Richard walked up the staircase. Sean embraced Richard less roughly and more warmly than Dick. Sean loved him. He pushed Richard at arm's length and studied his face in his glasses. You didn't even tell me you were getting glasses, Sean complained. Richard shrugged. I mean, you're going to see me with them sooner or later. When did you get them? A week ago. I haven't seen you for a week? Fuck. And they're big frames. Of course they're big frames. Fucking James Franco over here. And what color is this? Sean grabbed the glasses off of Richard's face on the last question. They're tortoiseshell. That's the color. My mom has a pair like these, fashion boy. Sean laughed. He tried them on. Don't ever make fun of me for not being able to see shit again. Can I have them back? I like them, Richie. I told you this guy's an asshole, Dick said from behind. He was resting his shin on Richard's left shoulder. Seriously, fuck you, Dick. Are you going to tell him what you're threatening, or should I? Sean said, glaring at his brother. Just like that, the focus was off the glasses. Richard's curiosity was piqued. He looked at the two of them. Sean looked genuinely angry, which is something that not too many people see very often, even someone as close as Richard was to him. What's going on? Richard asked. Dick yawned. He seemed pleased with himself. I'm going to take a shower, Richie. I'll let this asshole tell you. I don't care. We'll leave soon. He walked away into the single bathroom. Fuck you, Sean called after him. Are you going to tell me what the fuck happened? Richard asked, annoyed. Sean suddenly looked tired. Sad. Come on, I'll tell you, he said, pouting. He let Richard into the living room. The big brown stain in the middle of the green carpet caught Richard's eye every single time he walked into the room. To the Hunt brothers' credit, it was there before they moved in. Sean sat down on the couch that was also there before they moved in. All the furniture was. Richard followed suit. This fucking asshole, man. You gotta talk to him, man. When you go out to eat with him, what he's starting to do is so messed up, even for his standards, Sean said. Richard was losing his patience. Would you just tell me what it is? Am I supposed to fucking guess? He asked sarcastically. Sean sighed. Legs is supposed to show up any second now, probably in like 5 minutes, and I told you she was coming over to get her ring back and never see me again and blah, 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 blah. She knows I'm going out on a date tonight, and she understands I'm done with her for good this time. So she asked if she could suck my dick one last time, and at first I was thinking I can't do that to them, because if I didn't think the first date was actually a date, the fact that we have a second date tonight is a great indicator that the first date was actually a date and not just a hangout. Sean was talking fast, trying to get it all out. But then I think to myself, I am 100% sure this chick is a virgin. I might not be having sex for like 3 months if this goes well. So I text Legs back, suck my dick, get your ring, and get out, in that order, which I thought was a pretty badass way of putting it. Richard laughed. Sean had become animated, forgetting about his anger towards his brother. His face relived the expressions he had on it when he sent that text. Something between what Sean thinks a cool guy is supposed to look like squinted eyes, coupled with a sick, malicious smile, and a hint of childlike adolescence behind the whole charade, like he was faking the whole thing, playing grown-up. He was caught up in the glory of his sex stories. It really did remind Richard of Sean's old self. Back in high school, this was Sean's hobby, more like obsession. Sean went on with his story. So she texts me back, LOL, are you sure you don't want to fuck me too? My pussy will be wet from sucking your cock. And I'm just thinking, oh my god, this is going to be the greatest cum shot I've ever had. I text her back saying, just get here. So now she's on the way, and you know how I get super excited, and my brother was the only one around, so I shared that information with him, because I had to share it with somebody. But today, Dick decides to live up to his name. He said that he can't allow her to enter this house anymore, that he was sick of her being here, and that he wasn't going to let me do it, which I thought was a pretty aggressive stance for him to take. I was really taken aback, to tell you the truth. I asked him how he intended to stop me. He thought about it for like 10 seconds and was like, I know. And then he got his huge smile on his face. He just looked so fucking smug. It was disgusting. He tells me that if Legs enters this house today, he's going to tell Sinem that I fucked her. Which brings us to the present time, my feelings being extremely hurt by what my own flesh and blood, that he was willing to even consider doing such a thing. I'm just really upset, Sean looked at. That's really fucked up, man. He's not actually going to do it, though, do you think? He's probably just fucking with you. To even joke like that, though, is messed up, Richie. I mean, would you ever do that? Would you ever threaten the one thing I hold dearest to me in this world, which is fucking females? Would you ever threaten to take that away from me, or over something that literally has nothing to do with me? Sean looked truly hurt. I don't know what to tell you, man. That's a really scumbag thing to do. Richard felt bad for him, but that was about all he could feel. He didn't have a brother, and he wasn't obsessed with having sex with girls. Though if he did have sex just a tad bit more often, it certainly wouldn't make him unhappy. He didn't trust anyone enough to let them have the ability to betray that trust. All Richard felt was sympathy for his friend. He knew that Rich was doing something that was wrong, but it didn't really hit him as to the significance. The magnitude was only relevant in terms of how much it hurt Sean. You gotta talk to him, man. Talk him out of it. I think he's actually going to do it. Sinem will be the hottest, most bitchiest girl I've ever fucked in my life. It's so horrible for him to threaten to take that away from me, Sean said, pleading. Why don't you just not fuck legs? I mean, you already have 100 times. This time won't be that great. Take the ring and give it to her outside and tell her to fuck off or something. Sean looked shocked. I can't do that. I can't even... He was at a loss for words. I just can't do that. Why can't you? Richard asked, confused. Because it's wrong. That's why. He's being a terrorist. Dick is being a terrorist. He's meddling in my affairs, making demands of me that have no relevancy to him. It's wrong and I will not abide by it. I'm not going to bend to his fucking will. Fuck him. That'd be like bending down to the will of a rat. He's a fucking rodent to ever conceive of such a thing. He's garbage. Suddenly, Richard felt uncomfortable. The look in Sean's eyes was pure revulsion and hurt. Richard felt bad for him. He wished he could feel more. His lips crept to the right side of his face, almost looking like a facial shrug. Richard put his hand on Sean's back. I'm sorry, buddy, he said to him. I'll try and talk to him. It really is fucked up. Just then, Dick came out of the bathroom, doing his best attempt to whistle, but not succeeding. He was putting a wrinkled shirt over his wet skin. You ready, Richie? Richard looked at Sean. He was hungry. This is awkward, he thought to himself. Yeah, I'm ready to go. He stood up and turned away from his defeated friend. Oh, that's right. I can't leave until Legs walks in the house. We'll stay for a bit, Richie. She should be here soon, Dick said with a look of smugness that bewildered Richard. Dick walked over to the couch and prepared to sit down before Sean interrupted. If you sit down next to me, I will fucking hurt you, Sean said in a cold voice, quivering with anger. Richard wanted to leave the situation. This is not what he had intended on dealing with. He just came to get some food. Dick laughed, trying to break the awkwardness, but did not sit down. A knock came from downstairs. See? Didn't have to wait too long, Dick said pleasantly. He strode out the room and down the stairs to answer the door. Richard stood in the living room with Sean, nonchalantly avoiding eye contact. Ah, Jess. Don't you look lovely this afternoon? Dick's voice came from downstairs. Thanks, Rich. Jess's voice was airy and vapid, devoid of intelligence, light and stupid, high, literally and figuratively, like she was drugged on an hourly basis. See you, man, Richard said in a low voice to Sean. He walked out the room. Legs was already heading up the stairs. She looked good. Really good. Sean had done a number on her. Her skin was a nice tan from the tanning salons that she had been going to. She had noticeably lost weight. Her slightly jutting stomach was gone. She was wearing a pink tank top and dark blue jean shorts with too much skin exposed. She walked up the stairs in high heels. Richard had never thought much of Sean's selection of females. He got them where he could get them, was what he always said. Legs was the most attractive of the girls Sean had been with, but that wasn't saying much. She had always been kind of frumpy, fashion retarded. She wore glasses, for Christ's sakes. She didn't have them on today, and the frumpiness was gone as well. All that was left was tan skin and curves. She looked hot, and Richard knew that Sean had made her that way. Months and months of nitpicking and self-esteem bashing resulted in this girl looking great for a guy that had no respect for her. Richard couldn't approve. He understood the significance of Sean's accomplishment, but he wanted no part of it. Women who would do things such like that for a man who treats them like shit confused him. Women in general confused him, which is why he stayed away from them. He passed her on the stairs midway. He muttered, hey, and kept moving. She paid no attention to him. Sean had given her purpose, and saying hey to his friends was not part of it. It scared him to try and comprehend what was going on in her brain. It truly scared him. He left the house with a sigh of satisfaction. He was out of that uncomfortable situation and glad of it. Rich was chuckling ahead of him, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet in a jovial mood. So, where would you like to go, Richie boy? I actually kind of want High Street Grill now that I think of it. I want a lamb burger, Rich said, smiling. Richard didn't care. He shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, and decided to follow Rich to his car. The drive wasn't long. High Street Grill was literally 2 minutes away. Not much was said between the two Richards. Dick drummed his fingers to the rhythm of some popular radio song that Richard did his best to ignore. He hated the radio. Dick knew this and took a gleeful enjoyment in playing this especially poppy radio stations while Richard was in the car with him. Richard had given up on pleading with him to change the station long ago. Now he just admits to the gayness. Dick grabbed a novel out of the backseat of his car and led the way into the small pub. It was dimly lit, but extremely decadent. High Street Grill was the nicest restaurant in the little town. Richard had never been simply because no one had ever taken him. Now Dick had, and Richard liked the place. They seated themselves at a high table right next to the window. Dick plopped his book onto the surface and sat down sloppily. The place was empty but for a couple of older gentlemen sitting at the bar conversing about football. The bartender approached them for their drinks. What would I like, Richie boy? He said absent-mindedly as he surveyed the menu. Oh, I know. Root beer. May I have a root beer, my good sir? Okay, and how about you? The bartender turned to Richard. Richard had been looking at the prices. $13 sandwiches and $15 burgers. He looked up at the bartender. May I just have a water? He asked in the same polite fashion he adopted when dealing with all strangers and acquaintances alike. Rich groaned. Oh my God, Richie, trust you to be boring every time we go out. The bartender muttered something and excused himself. Richard looked at Rich, deciding what to say. He thought of Sean. You know you're a scumbag, right? Dick arched his eyebrows in feigned offense. Me? A scumbag? How so? He asked smugly. Richard started growing annoyed. If someone asked him why he spent time with Richard Hunt, he would not be able to answer them. He knew this would be a pointless conversation, but he promised Sean that he would at least try. Why are you doing this to your brother, man? He asked. Dick's face became serious for a moment. He actually seemed to think about his next answer, which is something that didn't happen often in relation to him. Finally, he spoke, his voice determined. Because, Richard, I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing my brother be on and off with this girl. He's been with her for the past 2 years, and he's been complaining about her for, let's say, a year and a half. That's 3/4 of the entire relationship I've been listening to him talk shit about his dumb girlfriend. He broke up with her in Philly and made me come pick him up because he couldn't wait to get back home to do it. I was late for work that day, and what does he do? Gets back with her the next day. I'm over it. Last week I walked into my house, I repeat, my house, the house that I pay half of the rent for. I walk into the sound of him beating her. Literally beating her in his room. I hear her smack and then I hear her cry out, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Then another smack, and she just starts moaning about how she's been a bad girl. The bartender had come back with their drinks. Richard looked at him uncomfortably. I'll give you some more time with the menus, he said lowly, making a quick exit. Dick continued. I go into my room, I close my fucking door, but does that help? No. I'm sick of it. And fuck him. If me telling Sinem is going to get him to stop fucking this train wreck of a girl, then I'm going to do it happily. He finished with a flourish, slamming a black straw into his glass of root beer and taking a long sip. Richard shook his head. He tried. That's about all he could have done. He was ready to eat. He looked at the menu again and found the cheapest item. Sirloin burger. $12. I'll survive $12, he thought to himself, even though it's $14 with the tip. He sighed. I hate spending money. He looked at Rich. He was signaling for the bartenders to return. You're ready, right? Rich asked. Richard shook his head. The bartender approached. May I have a grilled cheese, French fries, and the Greco-Lamb burger? Dick asked. The bartender nodded in accordance and looked at Richard expectantly. I'm just going to get sirloin burger, medium, please, Richard said. The bartender took the menus and left quietly. Richard liked this place. He hated over-enthusiastic waiters. The setting was nice, too. Lots of wood, polished wood, too. The tables, the chairs, the floors, and even the walls. He liked the simplicity of it. The dark lighting made each table its own little world, cut off from the surrounding others. It was the type of place he would like to come to often if he had the money. Unfortunately, he didn't. Richard looked at Dick, who already had his book propped up and his nose stuck in the center of the fold. Richard noticed the annoying habit Dick always participated in when reading. He would pluck at the eyelashes of his right eye with his forefinger and thumb. He thought of the Hunt's mom, slapping at his hand every time she was in the vicinity and saw him do it. She would complain to Richard, My son used to have beautiful, long, luscious eyelashes, and now they're short and brittle. He missed her. Mrs. Hunt was an extremely nice woman. She'd always tell him that he was a favorite of Sean's friends. That gave him a small sense of pride, though he tried not to acknowledge it. How is your mom? Richard asked, as if they were already in the middle of a conversation about her. Dick Harley looked up from his book. His fingers did not stop stroking his eyelashes. You know, fine, I guess, he mumbled. Dick was a dick, sometimes, hence the nickname. Richard sighed. Fuck, this is boring. Now Dick looked up at him. Do you want to talk? What do you want to talk about? Pick a topic. Cats? Dogs? I like animals. You want to talk about animals? Or is there something else? We can talk about automobiles, though. I'm not much a fan of those, and I don't know much about them. However, I can talk about how my Jetta has been bothering me lately. I think I might need a new car. I can also converse on the names I've been thinking of. I think every car that I own should have a name. But at the same time, I've had this car for 2 years with no name, and now just when I think I should come up with a name, I start thinking that the car isn't going to last much longer. So I'm sure you can see my conundrum. Richard sighed again. Go back to your book, Dick Hunt. Dick gave his famous Cheshire cat smile. The sides of his cheek curled upwards and almost completely closed his already squinty eyes. Thank you, he said, and his eyes went back down to his book. Richard's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the name, Sean Hunt. He had finished fucking Jess, Richard assumed. He answered, Richie boy, where the hell did you two run off to? I'm hungry now. Did you order already? Where are you? Sean sounded energized over the phone. No trace of the previous anger was left. It was like he was a different person. We just ordered, so you have some time. We're at High Street Grill, Richard said. Oh, cool, I love that place. I'll be right there, Sean hung up. Richard placed his phone on the table and looked at Dick. Your brother's coming, Richard said to him. Nice, Dick replied in a dry voice and continued reading. Sean was on his way to this, with his exuberant post-fuck energy. Sometimes Richard wondered why he doesn't elect himself to be alone 100% of the time. He recalled Caleb telling him that all animals like to eat in groups, that evolution had taught us to watch the other person's back while the companion is hunched over his meal, vulnerable to predators. Richard took solace in that fact. You can't fight physiology, he thought to himself. No one can. His phone vibrated again. He looked. It was Chris. He had left a text message. He hadn't heard from him in a while. Richie boy, where the fuck have you been all my life? The text read. Richard chuckled to himself. It's like everyone started remembering I existed at once. 10 minutes from now, Nate's going to call. Sorry, man. I've been really busy. I've been trying to break this record of mine, Richard replied back. 30 seconds passed before his phone vibrated again. What kind of record? Chris asked. Porn. I've been trying to break my old record of 48 hours. A minute passed. Another text message. Sounds unhealthy. Richard smiled. He liked Chris. He started texting back at the same moment. Sean strode through the entrance. His head held high, his eyes sparkling, searching the small place for his best friend and brother. He glided over to the two Riches as soon as he locked eyes on them and sat down in the same gay manner. At the same time, Richard sent his text to Chris. Blisters. Galore. Christopher. Christopher chuckled out loud at Richie's text. Maybe take some time off. I've been trying to get the band back together. I missed you guys. What are you doing tonight? Chris asked through text. He waited for a reply, but Rich didn't respond back immediately. Chris shrugged and pulled his pants up, getting off the toilet. He turned around and surveyed the shit he just took. He wasn't unhappy with it, but it wasn't spectacular enough to boast about, so he flushed and walked out of the bathroom stall. He walked to the sink and noticed the trash can next to it was overflowing. He smirked subtly and thanked himself for choosing to be a baker instead of a barista. He hated cleaning bathrooms. His own bathroom proved that. He washed his hands and looked at himself in the mirror. He needed a haircut again. Even with the coat he had, he could see his hair spilling out off the sides in an extremely unkempt way. His hair used to be longer. The girls loved it. Rap Zac Efron, rolling with my best arm. The old lyric came to Chris suddenly. He recorded that rap in high school, back when he wore the tight surfer necklace that almost choked him and the one-size-too-small Hollister shirts. He laughed. He couldn't remember the beginning or the end of that verse. Out of context, it really was a dumb line, but he was sure it would make sense if he remembered the whole song. He turned away from the mirror. There was only a small part of him that cared about that nonsense lyric, about his hair, about everything that was wrong with him. He wouldn't get his hair cut for another 2 weeks. He knew himself well enough to predict that. It didn't bother him. He chose Baker for a reason, after all. He didn't want to pander to other people's expectations of what he should look like and say. He didn't want to have manners and put on some fake-ass smile for customers like Sean had. He thought of the 1 month that the two worked together here and shook his head. Sean had wanted to be a baker all along with Chris. He wanted to get away from the never-ending line of needy people standing in front of the cash register, staring at the menu for 5 minutes, their mouths slightly open and confused by the simple decision as to whether to have chips or carrots with their sandwich, and what to drink. Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite, lemonade, or tea. And where to sit, outside or in. Sean's interview was too good. Sean the actor. Chris almost laughed out loud thinking of it. He had been watching Sean's interview with Tommy from his perch beside the oven. His upright posture, his hands clasped in front of him resting on the table, his face devoid of every emotion but attentiveness as Tommy went on and on about the protocols and policies. Sean used to brag about it. If he got as far as the interview, the job was his, every time. Out of all the people Chris knew and hung out with, no one was better at faking giving a shit than Sean, and this time it bit him in the ass. Tommy had asked him what position he would like to work. Sean said baker as gently as he could and added on some bullshit about how he used to watch his mother bake all the time and how it's been within him to want to learn the craft ever since he was young. The craft. Chris chuckled to himself about the memory. His feet had already led him back to his corner. His hands were already working, kneading the dough, checking on the bread that was already in the brick oven, sorting out the whole grain from the white. 6 months and already it had become muscle memory. His brain was left to think about Sean. Chris shook his head again. He wanted to see them again. Sean, Richie, and Joseph. It had been a while. Summer was over in another month. Not that it mattered. None of us go away to school, he thought to himself. He thought of how much he used to love summers. Those 3 months in between a school year. No work, just fun and games, alcohol and girls. He tried not to think about it. Those days were over, and reminiscing about them in the belly of Cosi wouldn't help anything. He kept his head down and worked silently without a train of thought. 10 minutes passed. 30 minutes passed. The rhythm he developed kept his body at ease. He played with the knife in his gloved hands, twirling it from finger to finger and bringing it down and slicing open the 100th batch of bread he had made today. Music would be nice, he thought to himself. The owner didn't allow the bakers to listen to their iPods while working. Since they were in view of the customers, it looked unprofessional. He felt someone brush up against his right arm. He turned and looked, breaking his rhythm. Danny. The owner stood next to him in a mocking manner. "Speak of the devil," Chris said with a false smile. "You talking about me to yourself over there? Maybe we keep you in seclusion too much. If you can't handle it, let me know. I'll put you in the back with the dishwasher so you guys can talk about whatever the fuck dumbasses like you talk about," Danny said, smiling. Chris groaned on the inside. He hated this game, but Danny liked playing it, so he kept it up. "Dumbass, huh? That's funny, 'cause the only dumbass I see standing here." He took a second to look around the room jokingly. He looked over Danny's shoulder. He turned around and then turned back to face Danny, shaking his head with certainty. "Yeah, the only dumbass I see standing here is you." Danny laughed menacingly. His eyes lit up, delighted from the threat of competition. The guy was a sports fanatic. "You better watch who you're talking to, punk. Just because I play around with you doesn't mean I won't fire your ass. Or even worse, take you outside and beat your ass." Now it was Chris's turn to laugh, though on the inside he was just waiting for the moment to end. He was done work in 30 minutes. "Man, your wife would have an easier time kicking my ass. I see your muscles. When's the last time you used them? Do you remember the first time you ordered off the senior menu? Was that like a big deal for you?" Danny gave a belly laugh, his tight stomach heaving in his tucked polo. Danny really was an intimidating guy. He was in shape and looked like he had been in the military for at least 10 years, just the way he walked. Chris had never had the chance to ask him. He did remember overhearing several of the managers talk about how Danny used to be a state trooper. Close enough. Danny stopped laughing and studied Chris intently. "Before you clock out, go talk to Greg about something." "Okay," Chris said. Danny turned to walk away. "And get a haircut," he said, already a few yards from where Chris was standing. Chris rolled his eyes and took off his apron. He was done anyway. Now he just had to find out what the hell Greg wanted so he could speed home and into bed. He threw the plastic gloves into the nearest wastebasket and headed off to look for Greg, hoping it wasn't going to be more or less the same male macho manly act he had just experienced. Where Danny was tall, good-looking, and intimidating, Greg wasn't. He was short, skinny, and unattractive, though he boasted about how he used to model. Chris found that hard to believe, but didn't care either way. He knew how loosely people could use the phrase, "I used to model." Sean used to model, but he was never on the cover of GQ or Vogue. He was, however, on an online college bookstore modeling alumni vests and sweaters. He made $900 for that. Ever since Sean's short career, Chris put less stake in those who bragged about modeling. Chris found Greg in the office. He knocked on the side of the door and said, "You wanted to see me?" Greg didn't look up from the computer at his desk. "Yeah, come in and close the door," he said. Chris restrained himself from rolling his eyes. Authoritative Greg today. Great, he thought to himself. He walked in, closed the door, and sat down. Greg did some more fiddling with whatever he was doing on the computer. "Hold on 1 second," he muttered as he clicked at seemingly nothing with his mouse. Chris thought to himself how hilarious it would be if he literally had nothing to do on that computer and was just trying to capture a persona of the boss being busy and telling his employee what to do something. He thought of Joseph. That's a skit idea. He made a mental note to tell him about it next time he saw him, which was hopefully soon. Some more time passed before Greg finally cleared his throat and ceased his pantomime of clicking things on the computer. He looked at Chris sincerely. So you know about what happened to Yusef. He's definitely not coming back, which means we're short a manager. Now don't get excited or anything because it's not you. It's going to be the other Christopher. The reason I'm talking to you today is because Christopher is leaving his position as head baker, which leaves that spot open. Me, Danny, and Christopher have been talking about a good replacement for him, and the first person he said was you. He said that you're the only person we have on staff that actually knows what he's doing. So we want to offer the position to you before anybody else. Greg finished. Chris understood it was a promotion. He just had not seen it coming. He was a little caught off guard, but he had to say something, so he said, stumbling on his words, "Yeah, I'd love to take the job. Thanks, Chris, for the recommendation." It wasn't much. Sean would have done better, but Sean wasn't in this position. Now it's going to be a lot of more responsibility. I have to know I can trust you, otherwise I'll be the one who looks like a dumbass to Danny. One thing is, you can never be late, especially on the days you come in at 6. That's when we open. You need to be clocked in and ready to go at 6. Otherwise we have a problem. Do you understand? Yeah, I can do that. Don't be late. Okay, the standardly hourly for the position is $10.50. Do you have a problem with that? Greg asked. Chris crossed his legs tightly. He thought about how stupid all this bullshit was. Of course he didn't have a problem with the pay rate. He was only making $8 an hour currently. He'd be making $2.50 more. He probably has to ask these questions, he thought to himself. Whatever. No, I don't have a problem with that at all, Chris said with a straight face. All right. We're going to change your schedule starting next week. Starting tomorrow, Christopher is going to take you under his wing and show you what's necessary as head baker. Sound good? Greg asked. Sounds good, Chris repeated. Greg stood up and Chris followed suit. Don't let me down, Greg said as he extended his hand. No problem, Chris said, taking Greg's hand and shaking it. Now get me the fuck out of here. Chris left the office and went to the front of the house. He walked up to the nearest barista station. Trish was standing at the computer terminal. Using his hips, he nudged her roughly out of the way. She looked up at Chris with a half-smile, half-upset expression on her face. She put her hands on her hips and glared up at him. Chris looked at her a moment and said, "Gotta clock out," and then proceeded to do so with a smirk on his face. "I might have been using that for something, Christopher," Trish said, trying to sound offended. Chris looked around. It was 5 o'clock. Not a customer was in sight. He looked back at Trish. "Shouldn't you be cleaning or something?" he asked. "I already did for your info," she said, nudging him back. She was chewing gum, Chris noticed. He thought about the potential conversation they could have about how she wasn't supposed to chew gum and how she only gets away with it because Greg wanted to fuck her. But Chris didn't want to have anything to delay him from leaving this place. So instead, he gave her a soft pat on the back and squinted his eyes. I'll see you around," he said in a character impersonation only Sean would know the origin of. He wondered why he bothered, but quickly answered that question. Boredom. He turned around and headed out the door. He checked his phone to see if Richard had ever texted back. He had. The text read, "I'd love to meet up, man. I know that Sean's going to be out on a date tonight. I don't know what Joe's doing, but I'm free all day and tomorrow, so it's your call. Pretty sure Sean is too." Chris got in his car parked not far away from Cosi. "Yeah, definitely gotta get the band back together. I'll text Joey and see what he's doing tomorrow. How about you confirm with Sean? I'm trying to hit some drink and snort some piff, you know what I'm saying." Chris wrote back. He liked texting Richard. They never had to communicate with an LOL at the beginning and end of a text message. A relationship like that is an invaluable one, Chris thought. Chris hardly had enough time to put his phone back in his pocket before it started ringing. He quickly checked to see who it was and was already prepared to ignore it. Kate. He contemplated just letting it ring. He'd been done work for 5 minutes and already she was calling. It was her 3rd summer back from Towson. He couldn't recall if she was like this the last 2 summers. He only knew that it was just happening this summer. She had somehow memorized his schedule. What was funny was that she never contacted him while he was at work, even though everybody else did. It occurred to him that she might not even know he was allowed to text people back while he was at work. He would reinforce that belief in the future. It was almost kind of humorous if not for the fact that it was annoying. He chose to answer. "Hello," he said into his phone as if answering the phone call of a stranger. "Hey, how was work?" It was Kate's voice, that never-changing voice that Chris knew and loved. Whether she was tired or excited, sad or happy, her voice always sounded the same over the phone. Nice and melodic. Relaxed. Chris hated talking on the phone, but he didn't mind as much when it was Kate. The topics she chose he could do without, however. He hated answering questions about his day. Absolutely hated it, and she was the only one who asked. His mother and father stopped caring about what he did on a day-to-day basis after he graduated high school, maybe even before. Chris couldn't remember. Now the only person left to ask about his doings was his girlfriend Kate, and Chris knew that he'd never have to ask her to stop. So instead, he answered as politely as possible. It was all right. He thought about it for a second and shrugged. Why not prolong the phone conversation, he thought to himself, as he sat back in his seat in his car in the middle of the parking lot. I actually got promoted out of nowhere. What? Really? What happened? Kate's voice was sincere, but it did not change from the soothing, relaxed state it was in when he had answered the phone. He imagined her lying down on her back, her head slightly hanging off a bed or sofa. For all he knew, that's what she did when she wasn't with him. It was what she did when she was, at least. You remember how Yusuf went to jail for something? Well, he got bailed out by his girlfriend or something and never came back to work, so the other Chris is replacing him as manager, and I'm taking his job as head baker. No biggie, Chris said jokingly. He hadn't really given himself a chance to celebrate about the promotion yet. It had happened so fast, but now that he was talking about it, he realized he was happy about it. He was in a good mood, though it took him a second to acknowledge it. That's great, Chris. That's really awesome. How much are you getting paid? $10.50 an hour. Wow. Keep it up and they'll make you manager, she said jokingly. Yeah, I doubt that, Chris said. We should celebrate. What are you thinking? Oh, I don't know. Chinese food? Kate giggled into the phone. How about sex? Sex is a good idea. Of course, but what about Chinese food? I've been really craving lim fongs recently. Chris thought about his plans for the rest of the evening. Bed and weed. He chewed on the decision. It had always been hard to change his mind once he was set on something. He replied, I say we do both. Tomorrow, on account of I already made plans with the fellas to get together tonight. Her voice sounded with a twinge of disappointment. I thought we were supposed to finish Wonder Years tonight. Finally. Chris scrunched up his face and looked up at the roof of his car. He hated phone conversations and he hated making plans. This was a double whammy. We can do that tomorrow, after Chinese food, Chris said, doing his best to keep his voice from sounding agitated. And sex, Kate said, laughing. She reminded him of why he loved her so much. It was almost as if she could see how annoyed he was getting. He never knew if she was aware of what she was doing or if that passivity came naturally to her. But the answer didn't matter to him. Only the result. The conversation was over. Well, I'm going to go home and change. He let the last word, change, drag out, waiting for her to say her goodbye. His eyes were closed, waiting, his head swaying side to side as he held the phone to his ear. Okay, maybe next time after you're done with them, depending on the time, we could still finish the show tonight. Definitely, Chris said. All right, I'll talk to you later. Love you. Chris made a silent cheer with the hand not holding the phone. Love you too. Bye. He snapped his phone shut immediately and slumped back in his seat. An inaudible sound managed to escape his closed lips. It sounded like a snore. He opened his eyes and straightened up, finally getting his chance to turn the car on. He started the car and turned on the stereo system. Eminem filled the car within seconds, finishing his last line that was cut off mid-sentence hours ago when Chris had arrived to work earlier that morning. He drove home peacefully to the sound of Slim Shady's angry voice soothing Chris from the speakers. 15 minutes later, he was home. In another 15 minutes, Chris planned to be asleep. He walked to the front door. He could already hear the dogs barking from within. He didn't care. He took a short breath and opened the door. Daisy and King were at his feet as soon as he entered. He brushed past them, hardly stopping to acknowledge them, both with a short, gentle pat on their heads. He walked into the living room and through the kitchen, his bed only a few yards away. He passed the stairs leading up to his parents' room, his parents' world more like. They lived up there, coming down only to exit the house. Past the stairs was the long hallway that separated Chris and Anthony's rooms. Chris's room being at the closest corner next to the stairs. He entered his room, slamming the door on the snouts of his 2 German shepherds, and after 3 short strides fell head first into his bed. His cozy hat was still on. His face was in his pillow, smothering him. The phone rang again. This time he didn't bother looking. Instead, without moving the rest of his body, he leveraged his feet out of his shoes, letting them finally breathe after such a long day. 15 minutes, Chris snorted. Try 5, and then he was asleep. He woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. He slapped around for it without removing his face from the pillow. Finally, his hands found it somewhere beneath the sheets, and he slowly turned onto his back to see who was calling. He had one guess. Kate. His eyes opened reluctantly and took several seconds to focus. Ding, ding, ding. It was Kate. He answered his voice groggy. Hello? Hey, what's up? Kate asked. Chris didn't even know what time it was. Nothing much. Did you want to come over? Are you done with your friends? Yep. Home alone now. Waiting for you to come join me. That made her laugh. Okay, I'll be right over, she said and hung up. It never took too much to make her happy. Another reason why Chris loved her. He was a big fan of not doing much. Over the course of the summer, Kate had been with him at every opportunity that she could, which was quite a lot, given the fact that she was unemployed. Rarely would she invite him over to her house to socialize and spend time with her family. More often she would come to Chris at irregular hours of the day. It would start with a text at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is when she would wake up. If Chris was doing a run with his father and brother, she would come over afterwards and wait in his room while she showered. If he slept through until noon and the weight room was the first thing on his to-do list, Kate would sit patiently in the corner and watch him do his workout. She would come every day after Chris got off work. She wouldn't leave until her own family needed something from her. She didn't mind the dirty bathroom or his messy room. It took a great deal to get her to complain, and Chris knew this. He knew that what he was getting was from her was special. One could go so far as to call it even irreplaceable. They had sex when he wanted to, not before and not after. All that was left to dislike about her were the little idiosyncrasies attached to her personality, those idiosyncrasies that he had no ambition to change, though he knew he most likely could. He lay in bed in the dark. Sean would, Chris thought to himself. Sean was very adamant about perfecting his women. He never compromised. He remembered hearing about the date he had gone on. Sean had mentioned it earlier. He was interested in this one. From what he gathered from Sean, this girl was completely different than Jess. Independent, smart, and materialistic. Chris was interested to see how that was going to play against Sean's rigid standards. He took out his phone and texted him. How was your date, pony boy? Did you smash yet?